This is February 2nd, 2024, and I'm making this recording, Maddie Lavora Perry, about the dream I had about the Lotus Sutra when I was, before I knew about Buddhism. And I wanted to share with you how that dream lines up with the Lotus Sutra, because this was the most important thing in my life, is discovering my connection to the Lotus Sutra. So I want to start by saying the Lotus Sutra the version of the Lotus Sutra I'm using is this one. It's the Lotus Sutra, and its opening and closing chapters, translated by Burton Watson. I'm also using the Soka Gakkai Dictionary of Buddhism a little bit. I know the words are backwards. I don't know if it's going to be flipped or not. And then my writings of Nichiren Daishonin. This is volume 1. You can't see it because I got the cover on it. But most of them going to be talking about what's in the Lotus Sutra. But so I wanted to give you a little background. All the writings that I'm talking about are right now today. I don't know what it'll be by the time you see this, but they're on nichirenlibrary.org, which is a Soka Gakkai website. And as you know, I'm not a member of the Soka Gakkai anymore. I haven't, at this point, I haven't been a member since for 14 years. I quit, I believe, in 2010 because the Soka Gakkai began to deviate very far away from what's taught in the Lotus Sutra. And I'm sure by the time you see this recording, I still won't be a member because I don't see that changing. If you're interested, I have a video about that on YouTube. But today I want to talk about my dream. So on Earth Day, April 22nd, 1976, which was a Thursday, and when I was 14 years old, I had a dream that once I dreamt it stayed with me from that point on. It never left. I think about my dream a lot. And I did after I had it then, even though I didn't understand. I didn't know that it was connected to the Lotus Sutra. So yes, that was Earth Day. April 22nd is Earth Day, and by then it was the 6th year that Earth Day had been celebrated. I didn't know that either. I didn't know that till later, that I had my dream on Earth Day. So the significance of me having that dream when I was 14, and then later, 14 years later, when I was 28, reading one of Nichiren's letters and then seeing him quote the Lotus Sutra, and in that quote, reading my dream written in the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. The significance of those numbers are this. The Lotus Sutra has 28 chapters. The first 14 chapters, chapters 1 through 14, Nichiren called the theoretical chapters of the Lotus Sutra, the theoretical teaching, because the Buddha prophesied in theory that all of us are Buddhas. Then the next 15 chapters 15 to 28 are called the essential teachings, because he, for the first time ever in his preaching life, and by the time he preached the Lotus Sutra, he'd been preaching for 40 years. He started when he was 30, and when he started preaching the Lotus Sutra, he'd been preaching Buddhism for 40 years. So he started teaching Buddhism when he was 30, and it was believed that that's when he attained enlightenment and began to do that, and continued for 40 years. So he's now 70. And for the first time in that 40-year preaching period, when he preached the Lotus Sutra, he said, I did not attain enlightenment for the first time when I was 30, but in fact, I've been enlightened since the incalculable remote past. So in other words, eternally, and really pointed to the fact that all of us are eternal Buddhas, that is the true identity that we have as living beings. So the significance of that is I was 14 when I had the dream. There are 14 chapters in the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. I was 28 when I discovered that my dream was in the Lotus Sutra, the Lotus Sutra was in my dream. And there are 28 chapters to the Lotus Sutra. So there's a lot of those correlations going on, which is why I'm making this video. Before I get started, I wanted to say that this is all theoretical, and none of it makes a difference if we aren't practicing the core teaching of the Lotus Sutra, which is the practice of Bodhisattva never disparaging, which was to bow to everyone he met and say, I would never dare disparage you because you are a Buddha. You are certain to attain Buddhahood. So in other words, he revered everyone he met. including people who tried to hit him. He would, beat him. He would run away and from a distance yell that to them. I would never dare disparage you because you yourself will attain Buddhahood. So I want to read part of that chapter. That's chapter 20 of the Lotus Sutra, when Shakyamuni tells the story of Bodhisattva never disparaging. So in that chapter, he says that Bodhisattva never disparaging lived a very long time in the past. In Buddhist writings, in the sutras, in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha talks about time periods that are vast, kalpas and kalpas and kalpas ago. And but in reality, in Buddhism, time the concept of time that we have is a delusion. Past, present, and future are all one. So there really is no past. The moment that matters is this one. There's no discontinuity between past, present, and future. And we're all one, meaning we're not separate from one another or separate from anything. But he uses stories, he tells parables in a way that helps people understand what he's trying to teach. So he taught that Bodhisattva never disparaging lived a long time ago, billions of years ago, of lifetimes ago. Again, we don't have different reincarnations, not Buddhism. In Buddhism, we are always here, but we perceive ourselves as coming and going. And I'll talk about that. So he says there, he's talking about a long time in the past. And he says, he's talking to a bodhisattva named Gainer of Great Authority. He said, at this time, there was a bodhisattva monk named Never Disparaging, meaning at this time long ago. Now, Gainer of Great Authority, for what reason was he named Never Disparaging? This monk, whatever persons he happened to meet, whether monks, nuns, laymen, or laywomen, would bow in obeisance to all of them and speak words of praise, saying, I have profound reverence for you. I would never dare treat you with disparagement or arrogance. Why? Because you will all practice the Bodhisattva way and then be able to attain Buddhahood. This monk did not devote his time to reading or reciting the scriptures, but simply went about bowing to people. And if he happened to see any of the four kinds of believers far off in the distance, the four kinds of believers are monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. If he happened to see any of the four kinds of believers far off in the distance, he would purposely go to where they were, bow to them, and speak words of praise, saying, I would never dare disparage you, because you are all certain to attain Buddhahood. Among the four kinds of believers, there were those who gave way to anger, their minds lacking in purity, and they spoke ill of him and cursed him, saying, this ignorant monk, where does he come from, presuming to declare that he does not disparage us and bestowing on us a prediction that we will attain Buddhahood? We have no use for such vain and irresponsible predictions. Many years passed in this way, during which this monk was constantly subjected to curses and abuses, but he did not give way to anger. Each time he spoke the same words, you are certain to attain Buddhahood. When he spoke in this manner, some among the group would take sticks of wood or towels and stones and beat and pelt him. But even as he ran away and took up his stance at a distance, he continued to call out in a loud voice, I would never dare disparage you, for you are all certain to attain Buddhahood. And because he always spoke these words, the overbearingly arrogant monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen gave him the name Never Disparaging. And then the Buddha goes on to say that when this Buddha was ready to die, he heard the Lotus Sutra being recited, and millions of verses of the Lotus Sutra. And he was able to accept and uphold each verse. So this after his death, this went on and on. He encountered many Buddhas and served many Buddhas, and this continued on and on and on, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, until finally this time happened. Gainer of great authority, this Bodhisattva Mahasattva, never disparaging, in this manner offered alms to a vast number of Buddhas, treating them with reverence and honor and praising them. Having planted these good roots, He was later able to encounter 1,000, 10,000, a million Buddhas, and in the midst of the law of these Buddhas, he preached the Lotus Sutra, gaining benefits that allowed him to attain Buddhahood. Gainer of great authority, what do you think? The Bodhisattva never disparaging who lived at that time, could he be unknown to you? In fact, he was none other than I myself. If in my previous existences I had not accepted, upheld, read, and recited this sutra and preached it for others, I would never have been able to attain supreme perfect enlightenment this quickly. So when I read this a few years back, it hit me. The Buddha just described the practice that led him to become a Buddha, because he says, I read, wrote, and recited, and that's what led me to attain Buddhahood so quickly. But what he said before that was he simply bowed to everyone. And there's no discontinuity between cause and effect. So the first cause that he made to become a Buddha, because cause and effect are one. The moment you make a cause, the effect is there. So the original cause he made was simply to respect people from the depths of his life, without even reading Buddhist scripture. When he was doing that, the Bodhisattva never disparaged and didn't even read or recite scriptures. He just did that action of deep reverence for people, for himself. He protected himself when people were trying to abuse him, and for others. From a distance, he still treated them with respect. So there's been plenty of times I haven't lived up to this, but this is my ideal. And this practice of never disparaging others, never disparaging yourself and others, I believe enables is what is the true practice of the Lotus Sutra. And so you don't have to be a Buddhist, or have a religion or anything to practice that, and practice that practice of deep respect for yourself and others. And that practice naturally spreads, even if it doesn't spread in the beginning. When you're treated with respect and you treat others with respect, you set into motion this opening of deep reverence for oneself and others. It is like a seed, and it will grow. So Nichiren actually wrote about what he thought was the most important part of the Lotus Sutra, and he says it was the never disparaging chapter. So I want to read that. He says, the heart of the Buddhist, this is from a writing titled The Three Kinds of Treasures, and it's in the Writings of Nichiren Daishonin, Volume 1. The heart of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings is the Lotus Sutra, and the heart of the practice of the Lotus Sutra is found in the never disparaging chapter. What does Bodhisattva never disparaging's profound respect for people signify? The purpose of the appearance in the world of Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of teachings, lies in his behavior as a human being. So the reason I shared all that before I go into my dream is because I want to make it clear that, when I first started practicing, I used to think that the whole purpose of Buddhism was to get as many people or everyone to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. But once I understood the Lotus Sutra from the point of view of the never disparaging chapter and what it says about how we actually become a Buddha, whether we chant or know the Lotus Sutra or any other scripture or not, is simply to respect ourselves and to respect others. And so I just wanted to make it clear that I'm sharing my experience with this dream, but what I want to be as a human being is somebody who lives like Bodhisattva never disparaging did. Again, I haven't always lived up to that. I've fallen very short of it, and I still do, but I am constantly trying. Better than I was, and I am determined to just continue to progress as a human being. So the significance of the Buddha saying that this was his practice is, again, that whole idea of oneness. So it was his practice. Shakyamuni, which means sage of the Shakya clan. The Buddha's given name at birth was Siddhartha Gautama. So this man's is the one who became a Buddha. That, as we define it, in Buddhism, he became enlightened. Buddha is an awakened human being. But because of oneness, that's why we are Buddhists too. Because if one person could become enlightened or is enlightened, then that means all of us have that capacity, because we're not separate. So I'm going to share here in the beginning, and then at the end, the Buddha really clarifying that we are already Buddhas. And he mentions that at first in chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, which is titled Expedient Means. So he's talking to one of his longtime followers, who was now also elderly like the Buddha was when he preached the Lotus Sutra, because this man had been following him, from the very beginning of him starting to preach. So it's like 40 years. So they're all old. And he says to so the man's name, the follower's name is Shariputra. And I'll talk about Shariputra a little bit later. Just keep it in your mind. He was a voice hearer follower. It's a designate, somebody who learns by listening to the teachings of others. So that was Shariputra. He was a voice hearer. He was in the world of learning out of the 10 worlds of Buddhism. You can look up 10 worlds. I'm not going to go into it. But he was a voice hearer. Shariputra. So the Buddha says, Shariputra, you should know that at the start I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me without any distinction between us. And what I long ago hoped for has now been fulfilled. I'm going to read that again. Shariputra, you should know that at the start I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me without any distinction between us. And what I long ago hoped for has now been fulfilled. So the significance of that passage is that the Buddha is saying right there, I took a vow as a Buddha to make all people Buddhas like me. And I've already done it. I've already fulfilled my vow, meaning that we're already Buddhas right now. He says it right there. He repeats it, but I wanted to say that. And the significance of that is that, I'm not sure why I put that there, but it's important. It's really critical to Buddhism to realize that you're already a Buddha, and so is everyone else, and to act accordingly. We try, we fail. This is the whole reason we practice. This is why I practice, is to stay awake to that reality. And Buddhists have no limitations. It's part of being a Buddha. You're boundless and limitless, which means that anything's possible. You can change anything. All right, so now let's get into my dream. What I'm going to do is read my dream and then talk about the parts of the Lotus Sutra that correspond to it. My handwriting is really bad. I don't know if you can read this. I was trying to be all fancy as a kid. You can't read it. It's probably backwards, but I was writing real slanted. I was 14. I was doing some fancy handwriting, and they're not even teaching handwriting in school anymore. So, kids might not be able to read this later if anybody wants to read the original copies. But that's why I wanted to get everything down so it doesn't get lost. So I wrote 4/22/76, my dream 39. My 4/22/76. That's the date. April 22nd, 1976. My dream Thursday night. Bear with me. It's not easy to read. We were in a parking lot. Me and I think Renee and Jeff, my brother and sister. But somehow I knew that the end of the world was coming. Then there was this great big explosion and everybody fell on the ground. When it was all over, I figured that everyone would be dead, but we weren't. While I was lying on the parking lot ground, I remember seeing people getting up and trudging through the lot. By the way, it was a gravel lot and we were next to a white car. I don't know what car we came from. I remember one person in particular, all dressed in white. They even had a white turban on their head. When I saw them, I remember thinking that all the survivors would probably get sick from radiation and die. Then everybody heard this voice, a great big voice that covered the whole world. While the voice was talking, this red brick building began to rise. When the building was on the ground, it was real far away to the east. I know it was the east because the sun was rising behind it. Even though the building looked kind of close, you could tell it was far away, about 10 miles away. The building had a whole bunch of windows in it. It had about 5 columns of windows, and each column had 5 rows. Well, while the building rose, the voice said he was God or something like that, and that he had caused the explosion, and that the people who didn't die were a chosen few and wouldn't die from radiation. He might have said that we wouldn't die at all. By then, the building had rose so high that it covered the sun up, but it didn't get darker. The voice said that he would leave the building there for 2,500 years or 25,000 years. I can't remember which. After that time, the building would crash back down to the earth and destroy everyone and everything. I think the voice or someone said, why don't Earth play catch with the building in pun? I said no, because then we would blow up right now, and that wasn't funny at all. Even though there weren't any clouds, it was a cloudy day. Then, to the far right of the sun, almost to the west, a gigantic maple leaf began to rise in the sky. It stopped as its stem just barely touched the ground. The leaf was yellowish brown. It too seemed closer than it actually was. Then Renee, me, and Jeff began to leave the parking lot toward the direction of the leaf. When we saw that the sun, which looked more like an amber egg yolk, had moved from behind the building and was now more or less in the north. It was getting darker, and the sun started looking like a giant movie screen because a film similar to a film strip was showing news headlines of war and violence. I said, why don't he quit? He done told us once. We get the message. Then someone agreed. The message was to spend our next years on earth usefully and stop fighting and get along with everyone. Then we went home. When I got home, I tried to be nice and everything, but somehow Jeff and I got into a fight about something. The next thing I knew, I was standing at a bus stop somewhere on Kinsman. That's the street that up the street from where I lived. I lived on 143rd in Kinsman. I was standing at a bus stop somewhere on Kinsman, even though it didn't look like Kinsman. Waiting with me were 2 other girls. One of them was a fat, fair-skinned girl that went to my elementary school named Tina. I wish I hadn't wrote that, but I want to be accurate. Tina Peary. All of us were dressed up in dresses and our best shoes and pantyhose. There weren't very many people on the street since most of them got blown up. We were waiting for the voice to come and pick us up. He had chosen us because we had each written something about him. Then I remembered that I had left the part that I wrote at home. I started to run home, but for some reason I found it very hard to run. It was like my feet kept sticking to the ground, but I kept running anyway until I finally got home. I went down into the basement and looked at myself in the mirror to Daddy's cabinet. Granddaddy had a file cabinet for work. My hair was pushed back and curled in the back. I must have didn't like it like that because I pushed it up and made me a bang to the right side. Then I left with 3 or maybe 2 sheets of paper in my hand. Each sheet was written in pencil on both sides. I had skipped 2 lines and written on both sides. I ran down the street, still with difficulty. When I got down to where Mickey and Nikki and JJ lived, they were near the corner of 143rd and Kinsman, a bus came down the street, 143rd Street. There were 4 or 5 people in it, including the driver. One of the people was a girl I knew named Angela. She had a twin. That was 4 pages. There was a 5th page, but I was lost. And I will say this before I get into the rest. In this writing, I say that I had to go home to get the what I written about the voice. And in fact, when I was 28 years old in New York, and read about the Lotus Sutra and realized that I had dreamt about it, I didn't have what I wrote about it because I was in New York City, and the writing that I had done, what I just read to you, was at home in Cleveland. So I had to go home and get it. And that was like my first time going home since I'd moved to become a Buddhist. Since I moved to New York. I moved to New York in 1985. And this was 87. And so when I got home, I retrieved the papers. And just like in the dream, it was written on both sides in handwriting. I did exactly what I said I did in the dream. I did it in real life. I went back to go get what I'd written about the voice. So that was one thing, and I wanted to mention that. Okay, so let's see. So the first part of my dream, I say we were in a parking lot. There was a gathering with people there. There was a gathering, right? Basically. So the Lotus Sutra, the introduction chapter, the first chapter of the Lotus Sutra is called Introduction, and it begins this way. This is what I heard. At one time, the Buddha was in Rajagriha, staying on Mount Gridakuta, that's Eagle Peak. Accompanying him, I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly, but we'll call it Eagle Peak, Mount Gridakuta. Accompanying him were a multitude of leading monks, numbering 12,000 persons. All were arhats whose outflows had come to an end, and who had no more earthly desires, who had attained what was to their advantage and put an end to the bonds of existence, and whose minds had achieved a state of freedom. Then their names were, and then there's a whole list of different people. There were also 2,000 persons, some of whom were still learning and some who had completed their learning. There was the nun, Mahaprajapati, with her 6,000 followers. And there was Rahula's mother, the nun Ashodhara, with her followers. There were Bodhisattvas Mahasattva, 80,000 of them, none of them ever regressing in their search for supreme perfect enlightenment. Okay, so it just goes on listing all the people that were at the gathering. My point is, the Lotus Sutra starts saying there's a gathering. My dream started at a gathering. There were people there. Okay, that's point number 1. Next thing, I was next to a white car. Now, the significance of that is found in the simile and parable chapter. In the Lotus Sutra, the Lotus Sutra tells parables. So in this particular chapter, he tells a few of them. And one of them is that his voice hearer disciples, like Shariputra, he was one of 2 types of followers that the Buddha, over the 40 years that he preached, kept saying, you will never attain enlightenment. Those are voice hearers like Shariputra, and those that were in the realm of realization. They were called Pratyeka Buddhas, partial Buddhas. And in those people, unlike voice hearers who learned by learning the teachings of others, they learned from others. Voice hearers did that. Pratyeka Buddhas, people in the world of realization learns through their own understanding. They gained an aha moment. And we all do both things. We all have the 10 worlds within us. Again, you can look up the 10 worlds of Buddhism and see what they are. But learning and realization are worlds 8 and 9. 7 and 8. So they're higher. There's 10 in total. Well, I'll just tell you what the 10 worlds are. There's hell, which is the lowest. That's a state of agonizing suffering. Hunger is just what it sounds like. You're craving. Animality, that's kill or be killed. Anger, that's a feeling of superiority over people. You feel like you're better than others. And so those are the 4 lower worlds. And they are visible on your face. So are the next 2. Hell, hunger, anger, animality. Hell, hunger, animality, anger, humanity. That's a kind of a neutral world when you're in a state of tranquility. And then heaven. That is a state of joy because you got something you wanted. So those are called the 6 lower paths. They are visible on your face. You can tell when somebody's in one of those worlds. You can't really hide it. But they're called the 6 lower paths because in the Indian tradition, the Brahmin tradition, which is related to Hinduism and was the religion that existed in India before Buddhism, there's a whole idea of reincarnation. So the idea was that you just keep reincarnating and reincarnating over these 4 lower worlds, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, like a rat on with a little treadmill thing, and you're stuck, in these 6 lower worlds. And so again, those are visible on your face. You can see them. Then the next worlds are called the 4 noble worlds. First, there's learning, where you learn from the teachings of others. Then there's realization, where you learn with your own aha moment. And then there's bodhisattva, where you feel that your happiness is tied to the happiness of others. You are not happy just to be happy with yourself. Have your own happiness. You feel that your happiness, again, I'm repeating myself, is enhanced or can't really exist when you know that others are unhappy. And then there's Buddhahood, which is a state of boundless joy, freedom, no limits, recognizing the eternity of your life and all life, and that you are the universe itself, that nothing is impossible, that everything is you. So there's a concept in Buddhism called the mutual procession of the 10 worlds. And basically, to sum it up, it says that all the 10 worlds have the other worlds in it. And the significance of that is, even when you're in the state of hell, in the depths of suffering, Buddhahood is there. And you can bring it out. So you can transfer hell into a Buddha land. At any moment, you can do that. So Shariputra and the other voice hearers and the followers that were in the world of realization, the Buddha had taught them, since he started preaching at the age of 30, that the highest level that they could attain was a state of nirvana. And let me backtrack. When the Buddha first became enlightened, even though he was really enlightened forever, but what the historical thing is, I'll just give you a little background. The Buddha was born a prince, and his parents had been told before he was born that the baby would grow up and become a monk, would leave the castle and become a monk. So his parents didn't want that. They wanted him to stay home and be protected in this life of, a prince. So they did everything they could do to prevent him from seeing anything that would make him want to become a monk. So they wouldn't let him see any suffering of any kind. They just kept him in the castle gates. So the story goes that, and Siddhartha was a real person. He's an historical figure. He wasn't like a god or anything like that. He was a man. And so at the age of 19, Shakyamuni got outside. He got outside the palace gates. And he saw birth. He saw a woman giving birth, and it was an excruciating experience. With you three, it wasn't. You were basically easy births. That was my fortune, and thank you for that. But he saw a woman giving birth and in pain. He saw birth aging. He saw an old person. His parents hadn't let him see aging people. They only let him see, younger people. He saw an old person. He saw someone sick. His parents made sure he'd never see anyone that was sick. Well, he did. And he saw a corpse. He'd never seen one. He's 19 years old and never seen a dead person. So then the thing happened that his parents had hoped wouldn't happen. He wanted to find out how to alleviate those sufferings. And in Buddhism, those are called the four sufferings that we all have to endure. Birth. Being born isn't easy for a baby. So we come in with a traumatic experience. We were all nice, warm, and cozy in the womb, and then all of a sudden, we're out, this cold, bright place. Hopefully you had a pleasant time in the womb, but bottom line, everything changes when you're born from what it was before. And so the four sufferings are birth, aging, sickness, and death. So he set out on a path to try to find out how to alleviate that. So he started doing aesthetic practices. Aesthetics are those people who burn their skin, use their blood to write things with, and all kind of really austere practices. So he was starving himself to try to reach a state where he was just beyond suffering. And so he did that, all those things, and he gained followers. People did follow him. He became well known as an ascetic. And, with the whole starvation thing, he finally got to the point where he's like, wait a minute, if I keep going this way, I'm just going to die. And I'm not going to alleviate suffering. I'll just be dead. So he started eating again. And then finally, he goes into this deep meditation when he's about 30. So he's sitting under this tree called the Bodhi tree, and he's meditating. So his followers watch him because he was meditating for a very long time. So they figured when he wakes up, he's going to say something profound. So he did. He woke up and he started telling people, you're a Buddha. You are an enlightened being. You're like me. Well, these are people who were used to a caste system where there's the lower people and the higher people, and God, different various gods that are that are protecting you and up in heaven and everything. And so for them to understand you are the greatest thing, their minds weren't ready to hear that. Their minds were shackled, thinking they were actually the lowest thing. So he was like, okay, they're not getting what I'm saying. They're just flying over their heads, right? What am I going to do? How am I going to get them where they can understand what I'm saying? So he said, I got an idea. I'm going to teach them that they can only get so high. And if I keep doing that and telling them they can only get so high, but that this other level exists that they can't attain, they're going to want that other level. They're going to hunger for enlightenment, for Buddhahood, to recognize that they're Buddhas. So bit by bit, over years and years, he taught, this, that they couldn't totally reach it. What he taught was that the highest state of being was nirvana. And nirvana means to blow out, to extinguish or blow out or completely obliterate your desires. And you'll see Buddhists today who believe that nirvana is the highest, is what Buddhism is all about, because the Buddha taught those kind of teachings for 40 years. So there are very many of them. He didn't teach the Lotus Sutra until the last 10 years of his life. So there's less writings about it. And then, in the Lotus Sutra, he reversed what he'd been saying for 40 years. So in this particular chapter that relates to my dream, so Shariputra was a voice hearer, and he was one of the people who believed that, nirvana was what he was was his sweet spot. And the Buddha, over the course of his teaching, he kept telling his followers in the worlds of the voice hearers and those in the world of realization, you will never become a Buddha, ever. Ever. He got food and shelter from people giving donations, and so did his monk followers. He would tell people, don't give them anything, don't give Shariputra anything. You're not going to get any benefit by doing that. He's lower than a dog. And so, but these people kept following him anyway because they thought, he had the truth. And it was like, why you dissing me like this? But they also recognized that he had something, that they wanted. So they were his followers. And so finally, when he teaches the Lotus Sutra in chapter 2, he tells Shariputra, you're going to become a Buddha. And Shariputra says his heart leapt with joy and he danced and was like, I got something I never thought I could get. And the Buddha had waited to tell him that until he was ready to hear it. He said, I was preparing you. So learning, the world of learning and the world of realization are called the two vehicles. The vehicle to get you to nirvana. They're the car that gets you to nirvana. Being a voice hearer in the world of learning, or being a person in the world of realization. And the reason that the Buddha had said those people would never reach it, reason he held back that information that they could actually be Buddhas, was because they were satisfied. They thought, I'm in nirvana, I'm in my sweet spot, and they had no desire to help anybody else get there. Their whole practice was about, I got mine. It didn't even occur to them to think to help other people get what they got. And that was why he would say, you'll never become a Buddha. He didn't tell them that was why, but that was why. They were satisfied with what they already knew and not concerned with helping others achieve what they achieved. But so when he taught the Lotus Sutra, he reversed that and he said, you already have it. You already are a Buddha. And so he explained, why did I tell you you couldn't become a Buddha before? Here's why. And he told a parable. He said, imagine there's a father and he lives in a beautiful castle, but then it sets on fire, it gets caught on fire and it's burning. And he's got all these kids, right? He's got a bunch of kids and they won't come out the house. They're just running around playing, not realize that it's burning down. So he's like, he calls them, get out the house, it's burning, but they don't even listen to him. They're busy playing. So he comes up with a plan. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna tell them that if they come outside, I've got 3 carts for them. I have a deer cart, a goat cart, and a ox cart. A jeweled ox cart, Okay, so he says, hey, come out. You come out. I've got these great carts for you. I've got a deer cart, a goat cart, and an ox cart. So the deer cart represents the world of learning. The goat cart represents the world of realization. And the ox cart represents Buddhahood. So when the kids run outside, there is no deer cart. There is no goat cart. There's only a jeweled, beautiful, resplendent, there's enough for each of kid cart that is drawn by a great white oxes. Great white oxes. And in Buddhist, in India at that time, that would have just been like the bomb. So those other carts, the other 2 carts, were never there. He just used them to lure the kids out so he could give them the big thing, the great vehicle. The Lotus Sutra is called the great vehicle. That's a type of Buddhism. Lesser vehicle Buddhism, Hinayana, and great vehicle Buddhism, Mahayana. Mahayana Buddhism is concerned with saving others. Hinayana is concerned with saving yourself. So, the Buddhism, so the point is that he revealed that no, you get the big thing. You get Buddhahood. You don't have to settle for those 2 lesser vehicles. And that correlates to my dream, because in my dream, when I showed up at the gathering, I was next to a white car, just like a jeweled cart drawn by a great white ox. Okay, that's that part. I didn't know how long this was going to take, but let's just go through it. So like in the Lotus Sutra, a building rises in the air. So I'm going to read about that. This is in chapter 11, Emergence of the Treasure Tower. And I said in my dream, a building rises in the air. So this is what happens in chapter 11. At that time, in the Buddha's presence, there was a tower adorned with the 7 treasures, 500 yojanas in height and 250 yojanas in width and depth, that rose up out of the earth and stood suspended in the air, just like the building in my dream. Various kinds of precious objects adorned it. It had 5,000 railings, 1,000, 10,000 rooms, and numberless streamers and banners decorated it. Festoons of jewels hung down, and 10,000 million jeweled bells were suspended from it. All 4 sides emitted a fragrance of tamala leaves and sandalwood that pervaded the whole world. Its banners and canopies were made of 7 treasures, namely gold, silver, lapis lazuli, seashell, agate, pearl, and carnelian, and it was so high it reached to the heavenly places of the 4 heavenly kings. The beings of the heaven of the 33 gods rained down heavenly mandara flowers as offerings to the treasure tower, and the other heavenly beings, Yaksha, Gandharvas, Asuras, Garudas, Kimannaras, and Mohanaras, the human and non-human beings, an assembly of 1,000, 10,000, millions, offered all kinds of flowers, incense, necklaces, streamers, canopies, and music as alms to the treasure tower, paying it reverence, honor, and praise. So, just simply, I dreamt of a giant building rising and staying suspended in the air. Okay, so this is what happened after the treasure tower rose. At that time, a loud voice issued from the treasure tower, speaking words of praise. Excellent, excellent, Shakyamuni, world-honored one, that you can take the great wisdom of equality, a teaching to instruct the bodhisattvas, guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas, the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, and preach it for the sake of the great assembly. It is as you say, Shakyamuni, world-honored one. All that you have expounded is the truth. So that person was many treasures. At that time, the 4 kinds of believers saw the great treasure tower suspended in the air, and they heard the voice that issued from the tower. All experienced the joy of the law, marveling at this thing they had never known before. They rose from their seats, pressed their palms together in reverence, and then retired to one side. At that time, there was a Bodhisattva Mahasattva named Great Joy of Preaching, who understood the doubts that were in the minds of the heavenly and human beings, asuras, and other beings of the world. He said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, for what reason has this treasure tower risen up out of the earth, and why does this voice issue from its midst?" At that time, the Buddha said to Bodhisattva Great Joy of Preaching, "In the treasure tower is the complete body of a thus come one. Long ago," and thus come one is another name for a Buddha. "Long ago, an immeasurable 1,000, 10,000 millions of worlds to the east, in a land called Treasure Purity, there was a Buddha named Many Treasures. When this Buddha was originally carrying out the Bodhisattva way," so just to be clear, a Bodhisattva is someone whose happiness is tied to the happiness of others. The practice of a Buddha is the Bodhisattva practice. So being a Buddha is being enlightened. What Buddhas do is be bodhisattvas out in the world. Okay. When this Buddha was originally carrying out the Bodhisattva way, he made a great vow saying, "If after I've become a Buddha and entered extinction in the lands and the 10 directions, there is any place where the Lotus Sutra is preached, then my funerary tower, in order that I may listen to the sutra, will come forth and appear in that spot to testify to the sutra and praise its excellence." So Many Treasure says, whenever the Lotus Sutra is being preached, my treasure tower is going to show up. When the Buddha had finished carrying out the Buddha way and was on the point of passing into extinction, in the midst of a great assembly of heavenly and human beings, he said to the monks, "After I have passed into extinction, if there are those who wish to offer alms to my complete body, then they should erect a great tower." That Buddha, through his transcendental powers and the power of his vow, ensures that throughout the worlds in the 10 directions, no matter in what place, if there are those who preach the Lotus Sutra, this treasure tower will at all times come forth and appear in their presence, and his complete body will be in the tower, speaking words of praise and saying, "Excellent, excellent." So Nichiren told one follower named Abutsubo in a letter of his called the Treasure Tower, because Abutsubo wrote him saying, "What's up with the treasure tower? What does that mean in the Lotus Sutra?" And Nichiren said, "The treasure tower is you. You yourself are the treasure tower. That's all you need to know. You are that jeweled, magnificent, boundless tower. That's you. But that's so. Great joy of preaching. Now this tower of the thus come one many treasures, because it heard the preaching of the Lotus Sutra, has come forth out of the ground and speaks words of praise, saying, excellent, excellent. So again, this corresponds to my dream because there was a voice that covered the world, just like Many Treasures' voice did. Okay. At this time, Bodhisattva, great joy of preaching, knowing the supernatural powers of the thus come one, meaning the Buddha Shakyamuni, spoke to the Buddha saying, world honored one, we wish to see the body of this Buddha, meaning they wanted to see Many Treasures. They heard him, but they're like, we want to see him. The Buddha said to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, great joy of preaching, this Many Treasures Buddha has taken a profound vow, saying, when my treasure tower, in order to listen to the Lotus Sutra, comes forth in the presence of one of the Buddhas, if there should be those who wish me to show my body to the four kinds of believers, then let the various Buddhas who are emanations of that Buddha and who are preaching the law in the worlds in the 10 directions all return and gather around the Buddha in a single spot. So basically saying, if you want to see my body, then all the Buddhas from throughout all time and space need to come here to see it. Only when that has been done will my body become visible. Great joy of preaching. I will now get, the Buddha saying to great joy of preaching, the Bodhisattva who asked, to see the body, the Buddha Shakyamuni saying, I'm going to gather the various Buddhas that are emanations of my body and that are preaching the law in the worlds in the 10 directions. So he said, I'm going to get all those other Buddhas. Okay. So they come. So the Buddhas, they had come from all throughout the universe, and they were emanations of Shakyamuni. But essentially, they're fictional. That's a short way of saying it. But for the purposes of this, it just shows that the whole universe was reverberating with this teaching, with the Lotus Sutra. And so the Buddhas, these metaphorical Buddhas, say we're going to give up, the wonderful existence we're living in our many worlds throughout the universe, and we're going to come to the Saha world. The Saha world is where we live, a world of suffering. It says this, at that time, the Buddhas of the 10 directions each spoke to his multitude of bodhisattvas. So the Buddhists in the 10 directions had their own followers, bodhisattvas, saying, good men, now I must go to the Saha world, to the place where Shakyamuni Buddha is, and also offer alms to the treasure tower of many treasures thus come one. The Saha world thereupon immediately changed into a place of cleanness and purity. So immediately the world of suffering transformed. That's the power of the Lotus Sutra. That's the power of our lives. We can transform any situation into benefit, not immeasurable benefit. So all those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from throughout the universe showed up to see Many Treasures. Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, all kind of beings. Okay, so finally, like everybody's there now, and then Shakyamuni does this. Shakyamuni Buddha, with the fingers of his right hand, then opened the doors of the Tower of 7 Treasures. A loud sound issued from it, like the sound of a lock and a crossbar being removed from a great city gate. And at once, all the members of the assembly caught sight of Many Treasures thus come one, seated on a lion's seat inside the treasure tower, his body whole and unimpaired, sitting as though engaged in meditation. And they heard him say, excellent, excellent Shakyamuni Buddha, you have preached the Lotus Sutra in a spirited manner. I have come here in order that I may hear this sutra. At that time, the 4 kinds of believers observing this Buddha who had passed into extinction immeasurable 1,000, 10,000 millions of kalpas in the past, speaking this way, marveled at what they'd never known before and took the masses of heavenly jeweled flowers and scattered them over Many Treasures Buddha and Shakyamuni Buddha. At that time, Many Treasures Buddha offered half of his seat in the treasure tower to Shakyamuni Buddha, saying, Shakyamuni Buddha, sit here. Shakyamuni Buddha at once entered the treasure tower and took half of the seat, seating himself in a cross-legged position. So now you have the 2 Buddhas side by side, Shakyamuni and Many Treasures. And the significance of that in my dream is that the sun rose up behind the building, and then so did that leaf, side by side, right behind the building. I can see them in my mind the way they were. I know I used the words east, west, and north and everything, but I remember what I saw. There was the sun, there was the leaf, and then the building was in front of them. These were behind. Here's the building, here's the sun, here's the leaf. And I believe they represented Shakyamuni and many treasures. So in the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni represents a provisional Buddha, meaning this is a transient identity, not the permanent identity. Many treasures represents the eternal Buddha. And that eternal part of ourselves, that our true identity. And whenever we're practicing the Lotus Sutra, this true identity comes forth. And again, in my broader sense of seeing that, this, when we are reverently respecting ourselves and others, that's when our true identity is coming forth. And when we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, or even mention the word Lotus Sutra, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo being devotion to the wonderful law of the Lotus Flower teaching of the Sutra. It's a long way of saying Lotus Sutra. We are tapping into that directly. But again, I do not believe you have to chant to do that. It's really more about our behavior, like Nichiren said, our behavior as human beings. But anyway, my point is, there's Shakyamuni, and there's many treasure. First many treasures was there, so that would be the sun that I saw, because that's what was there first, and then the leaf. That's Shakyamuni showing up, and then what ends up happening in the story, at that time the members of the great assembly, seeing these two thus come one seated cross-legged on the lion's seat in the Tower of Seven Treasures, all thought to themselves, these Buddhas are seated up high and far away. If only the thus come ones would employ their transcendental powers to enable all of us to join them in the air. Immediate Shakyamuni Buddha used his transcendental powers to lift all the members of the great assembly up into the air, and in a loud voice he addressed all the four kinds of believers, saying, who is capable of broadly preaching this Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law in this Saha world? Now is the time to do so, for before long, the thus come one will enter nirvana. He's saying, I'm going to die. The Buddha wishes to entrust this Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law to someone so that it may be preserved. So I want to just get to that, and I know I said he said nirvana, also signifies that's when you die. But it really does mean extinguishing your desires. Okay, so but the purpose of Buddhist practice is to attain enlightenment, not nirvana. The enlightenment transcends death. So, but my point is that the two Buddhas were there, and that's what I saw in my dream. I saw that's what was symbolized in my dream, as I see it, was the sun and the leaf behind that building, or in the building, as it is in the Lotus Sutra. Okay, onward. So the Buddha says this in, what chapter is this? Chapter 11. He's saying this to the assembly in the ceremony in the air, where the treasure, the treasure tower and everybody's up in the air. So I say to the great assembly, after I've passed into extinction, who can guard and uphold and read and recite this sutra? Now in the presence of the Buddhas, let him come forward and speak his vow. Okay, so he's saying, who's going to protect this teaching in the once I'm dead, in the future? In the Courage and Devotion chapter, once again, the Buddha saying, who's going to protect this teaching in the future? So these Buddhas say, they say this, these bodhisattvas. At the time, the bodhisattvas joined their voices together and spoke in At that time, the bodhisattvas joined their voices together and spoke in verse form, saying, we beg you not to worry, Shakyamuni. After the Buddha has passed into extinction in an age of fear and evil, we will preach far and wide. There will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us and will attack us with swords and staves, but we will endure all these things. In that evil age, there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, who will claim they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind. Greedy for profit and support, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. These men with evil in their hearts, constantly thinking of worldly affairs, will borrow the name of forest-dwelling monks and take delight in proclaiming our thoughts, saying things like, these men are greedy for profit and support, and therefore they preach non-Buddhist doctrines and fabricate their own scriptures to delude the people of the world. Because they hope to gain fame and renown thereby, they make distinctions when preaching this sutra. Because in the midst of great assemblies, they try to constantly defame us, they will address rulers, ministers, Brahmins, and householders, as well as other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, these are men of perverted views who preach non-Buddhist doctrines. But because we revere the Buddha, we will bear all these evils, though they treat us with contempt, saying, you are all no doubt Buddhas. All such words of arrogance and contempt we will endure and accept. In a muddied age, in an evil kalpa, in an evil age, there will be many things to fear. Evil demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. But we, reverently trusting the Buddha, will put on the armor of perseverance in order to preach this sutra. We will bear these difficult things. We care nothing for our bodies and lives, but are anxious only for the unsurpassed way. In ages to come, we will protect and uphold what the Buddha has entrusted to us. This the world-honored one must know. The evil monks of that muddy age, failing to understand the Buddha's expedient means, how he preaches the law in accordance with what is appropriate, will confront us with foul language and angry frowns. Again and again we will be banished to a place far removed from towers and temples. All these various evils, because we keep in mind the Buddha's orders, we will endure. If in the settlements and towns there are those who seek the law, we will go to wherever they are and preach the law entrusted to us by the Buddha. We will be envoys of the world-honored one, facing the assemblies without fear. We will preach the law with skill, for we desire the Buddha to rest in tranquility. In the presence of the world-honored one and of the Buddhas who have gathered from the 10 directions, we proclaim this vow. The Buddha must know what is in our hearts. So that's the vow they made. And they talked about an age of fear and evil. And in the Lotus Sutra and in various some other sutras, the Buddha identified when that age of fear and evil would be. The form affairs of Bodhisattva Medicine King. It's chapter 23. Buddha's talking to a Bodhisattva named Constellation King Flower. After I have passed into extinction in the last 500-year period, you must spread this sutra abroad widely throughout Jambudvipa and never allow it to be cut off. So the significance to that in my dream is that he specifically mentions the time period after his death, the 5th 500-year period, 2,500 years after the Buddha's death, the age of fear and evil will begin. And that's the exact number that the voice that I heard in my dream, those are the exact amount of years that the voice said that we had. Those are that gathering that we had to prevent the world from being destroyed. Now, in my dream, we had 2,500 years to do the work, but in the Lotus Sutra, this work was going to need to be done starting 2,500 years after the Buddha's death. But I don't find that really relevant because there's no discontinuity between past, present, and future. They are one. So the point is that number 2,500 existed in my dream, And it's in the Lotus Sutra in terms of a time period. It's a time period we're in right now. The time when it's time to spread this teaching. So then, okay, so those Buddhists that I talked about who made that great vow that I just read, those were not Buddhists. Those bodhisattvas and followers were those who were at the assembly, and it took place. I don't know if I said it was at Eagle. Yeah, I told you it was at Eagle Peak is where the assembly was taking place, and they were at the ceremony in the air and everything. And they said, "We'll do it. We'll be." The Buddha was asking, "Who's gonna protect and guard this law in the future?" And they were like, "We'll do it." And then they had the whole part I read. They were saying, "We're going to do it." And then in the very next chapter, after they say that, the part that I read where they say, "I hope you know our hearts. We're going to stand up." The Buddha said, at that time, this very next chapter, emerging from the earth, chapter 15. At that time, the Bodhisattvas Mahasattva who had gathered from lands in other directions, greater in number than the sands of Ganges rivers, stood up in the midst of the great assembly, pressed their palms together, bowed in obeisance, and said to the Buddha, "World-honored one," this is another group saying the same thing, "if you will permit us in the age after the Buddha had entered extinction to diligently and earnestly protect, embrace, read, recite, copy, and offer alms to this sutra in the Saha world, we will preach it widely throughout this land." So I'm gonna stop right there. Okay, there's another group saying the same thing. We're gonna protect, embrace, read, recite, copy, and offer alms to this sutra in the Saha world, the world we're in. We will preach it throughout this land. Okay, so first of all, here's another group from the ceremony in the air saying we're going to do it, just like the ones I read before said in the previous chapter, encouraging devotion. But the other thing, they say they're going to do something specific. We're going to protect, embrace, read, recite, and copy. My whole thing with my dream is I wrote it down. I did exactly that. Before I knew anything about it. That's why I got to go see the voice, because I had written something about the voice. I copied it. And that's what it was. I copied the Lotus Sutra in real time in 1976 as it appeared in my dream. I kept my vow, my eternal vow. So I want to say that. But anyway, so these bodhisattvas, these followers are saying, we're going to show up in the future. We'll be there. We're going to make sure that the law, that the Lotus Sutra endures. And the Buddha said, "Leave off, good men. There's no need for you to protect and embrace this sutra." Why? Because in this Saha world of mine, there are bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, who are as numerous as the sands of 60,000 Ganges rivers. And each of these bodhisattvas has a retinue equal to the sands of 60,000 Ganges rivers. After I've entered into extinction, these people will protect, embrace, read, recite, and widely preach this sutra. He's talking about us. He tells the people that were there over, 3,000 years ago, never mind. I got people who are already in the Saha world. They've been here. And they're the ones who are going to protect this sutra. They're the ones who are going to protect, embrace, read, recite, and widely preach this sutra. I'm one of those. So are you. When the Buddha spoke these words, the earth of all the billion lands of the Saha world trembled and split open, just like the earthquake I had in my dream. And out of it emerged at the same instant immeasurable thousands, 10,000s, millions of bodhisattvas, mahasattvas. The bodies of these bodhisattvas were all golden in hue, with the 32 features and immeasurable brightness, 32 features that a Buddha is supposed to have. Previously, they had all been dwelling in the world of empty space underneath the Saha world. But when these bodhisattvas heard the voice of Shakyamuni speaking, they came up from below. They're called the bodhisattvas of the earth. That's us. From time without beginning. The earth, meaning the foundation of who we are, is to do this work of being happy and leading others to happiness. You can call that enlightenment. But that's why we're here, to be happy and to lead others to happiness. It's the whole reason we're born. And there was a bunch of them that came up, but an infinite number of them. But here's how they're described. They came up, they issued up out of the earth, just like the people that I saw getting up off the ground after that explosion in my dream. I look around and there's people there that hadn't been there before. They weren't there when we arrived. When I said the dream, it was just me, my sister, and my brother, my youngest brother. But then the explosion happened, and I look around, and all of a sudden there's people there that weren't there before, just like these people came up out the ground. And one of the people I saw, I said had on all white and a turban, and he was male. I identified him that way. I believe I was seeing Shakyamuni. Each of these bodhisattvas, but again, there's no discontinuity between past, present, and future. So I was there when this happened. So were you. Each of these bodhisattvas was the leader of his own great assembly, and each brought with him a retinue equal in number to the sands of 60,000 Ganges rivers, to say nothing of those who brought retinues equal to the sands of 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, or 10,000 Ganges rivers, or of a retinue equal to as little as the sands of one Ganges river, half a Ganges river, 1/4 of a Ganges river, or as little as 1 part in 1,000, 10,000, a million nayutas of Ganges river, or those whose retinue was only 1,000, 10,000, millions nayutas, or only 1,000,000, 10,000, or only 1,000, 10,000, or 100, 10,000, or just 10,000, or only 1,000, 100, or 10, or who brought with them only 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 disciple, or those who came alone, preferring to carry out solitary practices. Such were they then, immeasurable, boundless, beyond anything that can be known through calculation, simile, or parable. There were a lot of them, and some of them had a lot of followers, and some came alone. And the significance of that is Buddhahood is for everyone. Everyone. You don't have to be in a church. If you had to be in a church or a temple or a group to attain enlightenment, then that would leave out people who don't want to do those things. But enlightenment's for all. So these people looked better than Shakyamuni. And there was a whole perplexed thing going on with this. And I could read, I totally encourage you to read the Emerging from the Earth chapter of the Lotus. I should encourage you to read every chapter I've mentioned. But just to sum up what happened, people, the people in the assembly saw these gazillions of people show up who looked way better than Shakyamuni. And they said, where they come from? Who are they? And Shakyamuni said, these are my disciples from the remotest past. And I'm like, no, how could that be? You haven't been alive long enough to teach all these people, number one. Number two, they look like your teacher. They look wiser and more resplendent than you. And that's how this chapter ends. So it's the next chapter, the lifespan of the Thus Come One, when Shakyamuni reveals that, no, he didn't become enlightened when he was 30, but that he's been eternally so. And that's how he was teaching these people for all that time. And what that says right there is really points to the idea, the truth, that we are always and always have been eternal Buddhas. And I'm going to relate that to my dream. Remember in my dream, the great voice said that the great voice said we wouldn't die at all. That's what the Buddha said in the next chapter, lifespan of the Thus Come One. Good men, the scriptures expounded by the Thus Come One are all for the purpose of saving and emancipating living beings. Sometimes I speak of myself, sometimes of others. Sometimes I present myself, sometimes others. Sometimes I show my own actions, sometimes those of others. All that I preach is true and nothing is false. Why do I do this? So in other words, he's saying, no matter what the teaching is, no matter what it is, The essence of everything is Buddhahood. Everything has an enlightened nature. And what we can do when we tap into that within ourselves is we can bring out the enlightened nature in every situation, in every problem, and turn it into a benefit, a blessing beyond anything we can imagine. And that also means no matter, again, what the teaching is, there's Buddha wisdom in that because everything is one. So you can't separate it out and say that's not Buddhism. Once you see everything through the lens of this teaching of universal enlightenment, then you can pull out the Buddha wisdom in anything. Then how that, again, on a practical level, that means whatever you're going through, you can turn it around. That's whatever it is. No exception. That doesn't mean it's going to turn around and be what you imagine it's going to be all the time. But what it does mean is that when you get to the other side of it, it's going to be more than you imagine. That's my experience. That, through my practice, because I chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, that the result is always more than I could imagine. And even for a time period when I wasn't chanting, but I still was Buddhist, I was able to create that. Because I stopped chanting because I wanted to prove that you don't have to chant in order to bring forth your Buddha nature. That was after I quit the SGI for about 4 years. I did not do a daily practice. I just manifested by determining, okay, in this moment, I'm going to change this. And I did it. So after that 4-year period, when I started chanting again, it wasn't from the point of view of, oh, I'm afraid to not chant. It was from the point of view, I want to chant because I want to chant. It was a tool to help me manifest my Buddha nature. But I was able to do it without it. Just like Nichiren originally did, just like Shakyamuni didn't chant. And Nichiren didn't originally chant when he first became enlightened. He chanted after. He came across, through his study of Buddhism, the practice of chanting the title of the Lotus Sutra. But he'd already tapped into his Buddha nature when he did that. He wanted to find a way, as a bodhisattva, to help everybody do it. Easily. Without having to be to study, in a monastery and all that. Okay, all that I preach is true and not false. Why do I do this? That thus come one perceives the true aspect of the threefold world exactly as it is. There is no ebb or flow of birth and death. There is no existing in this world and later entering extinction. It is neither substantial nor empty, neither consistent nor diverse, nor is what those who dwell in the threefold world perceive it to be. All such things that thus come one sees clearly and without error. So I said that to say, here he's saying there is no ebb and flow of birth and death, which is what I was told that what the voice said to me in my dream. We wouldn't die. Since I mentioned the threefold world, I just want to say what it is. The world of unenlightened beings who transmigrate within the 6 paths from hell to heaven. So that's unenlightened beings. They're going from, hell, hunger, animality, anger, humanity, and heaven. They're just going around in that circle lifetime after lifetime. So now that we know what the threefold world is. You said, all that I preach is true and not false. Why do I do this? That thus come one perceives the true aspect of the threefold world exactly as it is. Okay, so now that makes sense. If we're in those 6 lower worlds, we can feel like we're at the mercy of whatever happens to us. That's the nature of those 6 worlds. You're in the world of heaven, but as soon as something crappy happens, you're dropped down back into hell again. But if you can perceive the true nature of the threefold world, which is that it has it's enlightenment, then that transforms everything. You're not at the whim of just being in heaven or giving way to your anger. You can transform your situation. And sometimes you give away to your anger, but you can transform it after the fact. You can fix anything, heal anything. That thus come one perceives the true aspect of the threefold world exactly as it is. There is no ebb or flow of birth and death. There is no existing in this world and later entering extinction. It is neither substantial nor empty, neither consistent nor diverse, nor is what those who dwell in the threefold world perceive it to be. All such things that thus come one clearly sees without error. So the whole point I was making, but I needed to add that explanation, is that I dreamt that we wouldn't die. Those of us who were there, who heard this. And that applies to all of us. According to Nichiren, this verse section of chapter 16 is the essential part of the Lotus Sutra, just under the title. The most essential part of the Lotus Sutra, according to Nichiren Buddhism, is its title, because it contains all of the benefits of the sutra itself, and the benefit of the sutra is enlightenment. So Nichiren taught that the title itself contains that. So the Buddha says here, in answer to the question, how could you have possibly taught all these people? And why do they look better than you? Since I attained Buddhahood, the number of kalpas that have passed is an immeasurable 100,000, 10,000, millions, trillions, asamkhya's. Constantly, I have preached the law, teaching, converting countless millions of living beings, causing them to enter the Buddha way. All this for immeasurable kalpas. In order to save living beings as an expedient means, I appear to enter nirvana. But in truth, I do not pass into extinction. I am always here, preaching the law. I am always here. But through my transcendental powers, I make it so that living beings in their befuddlement do not see me even when close by. When the multitude sees that I have passed into extinction, far and wide they offer alms to my relics. All harbor thoughts of yearning, and in their minds thirst to gaze at me. When living beings have become truly faithful, honest, and upright, gentle in intent, single-mindedly desiring to see the Buddha, not hesitating even if it costs them their lives, then I and this assembly of monks appear together on Holy Eagle Peak. At that time, I tell the living beings that I'm always here, never entering extinction, but that because of the power of expedient means, at times I appear to be extinct, and at other times not. And if there are living beings in other lands who are reverent and sincere in their wish to believe, then among them too, I will preach the unsurpassed law. So again, the Buddha already had said, as I read in the very beginning, he made a vow to make all of us equal to him. So everything he says about himself is us. It's not the Buddha with Shakyamuni Buddha. The Lotus Sutra is the story of you and I. That's how you read the Lotus Sutra, as what is this telling me about me? At the end of chapter 16, when the Buddha says what I'm going to read next, he's identifying, as I've said more than once, why we're here. Always I am aware of which living beings practice the way and which do not. And in response to their need for salvation, I preach various doctrines to them. In other words, everything we go through is in order to lead us to ourselves, to lead us to understanding our eternal identity and the power we have in our lives. Various doctrines, various experiences, various teachings. The ultimate goal is this. At all times, I think to myself, how can I cause living beings to gain entry into the unsurpassed way and quickly acquire the body of a Buddha? At all times, I think to myself, how can I cause all living beings to gain entry into the highest way and quickly acquire the body of a Buddha? This is why we're here. This is why I had my dream. I hope you'll read, what I talked about